Hello everyone, how are you all? It's good to see you here. For those that don't know me, my name is Andrew Hunt. I run an IT firm down the road during my spare time, and I'm not here chairing the EMA Employers Forum, so it's good to have you all here. The obligatory health and safety note is that it's a lot safer if you turn your phone off. In my case, I think I left it in the car, so it's definitely not going to ring here. But if you turn your phone to silent or off, that'd be kind. If you need to go to the bathroom, there's bathrooms are clearly labelled outside. In the event of a fire, well, I think it's fairly obvious. Go that way. Today we are recording this webinar. We're recording this session rather as a webinar, and I believe Mike says that we're live streaming it as well to some of the people who couldn't sit here and join us today. So it's great to have not just a full physical room, but a full virtual room as well. Who's here at their first employers meeting? There's a few hands. Well, thank you for coming along. It's great to have you here, and hopefully you've got some insights you're prepared to share during the workshop. So you know, feel free if there's questions you've got to rip in. Today we've got talking about immigration, because when we ask employers what the key issues are, every time we've asked that at this forum, the number one issue is recruitment and finding people, of which immigration is part of that. That's the number one issue. If it's not dismissals or redundancies or performance management or leave or anything else, it's recruiting is the question, is the answer we always get. So today we're doing immigration, which is a key part of that recruitment. And so we're going to have Professor Paul Spoonley from Massey University and Carl Andrews from Immigration New Zealand to talk to us about that. And as I say, if you all have experiences, feel free to share those. But before we kick off, I'm just going to ask Mike Burgess and Mark Champion from the EMA Advocacy Team just to give us a 5-minute update on what's going on around the advocacy space at the EMA. So, Mike and Mark.
Thank you, Andrew. I'll be very quick. I'd just like to give you an update on some of the policy issues we've been working on over the last few months here. And as you may recall, a particular private members bill went through discussion the other month on the minimum wage contractors remuneration bill. This was done by David Parker in terms of wanting to provide the minimum wage to a number of the contracting sector. We had quite a large media campaign associated with this, with Business New Zealand as well as our regional associations. And at the end of the day, it was Peter Dunn had actually listened to our views and your views on what effect it would have on the businesses, and he decided he would not support that bill. So we were actually surprised at that stage that the bill actually got to the third reading. You know, bear in mind that the Select Committee advised that they shouldn't proceed with the bill. So that was a bit of good news there. The holiday pay issue, I don't know if you're aware of that, but that happened when there was a bit of a miscalculation going on with the police actually recognised that they underpaid quite a number of their staff there. We've got a working group set up for that, and through Business New Zealand as well, and they're working and looking to finding some of the issues around what is holiday pay, what should be covered in that aspect of that. So that's a particular area we're quite interested in working on. Pay equity is another one, which you may or may not be aware. A group had been set up to advise the government on where we should sit with the pay equity process. And basically, in a nutshell, it was all about the recommendations was that pay equity should be handled in the company first before going to arbitration or court under the current Employment Relations Act. That has gone to the Minister, and we believe, we're still waiting on that, but we believe the Cabinet is quite split on actually having a decision in that area. So they're the three main focus on employment legislation at the moment. Just some upcoming events from our office. We've got the Privacy Commissioner coming to address the employers' forum as well, so that should be quite an interesting scenario cases of what's actually happening in that space. We've got a literacy forum on the 2nd of November with our guest speaker will be Caroline Spencer, who's the Learning and Development Manager at New Zealand Post, which now employs still 6,000 people. So that should be very interesting to actually have a look at that. So the Privacy Commission will be on the 5th of December. And just briefly, we've got the Employers Survey coming out soon, so you'll all be able to express your views on a number of issues there. And basically, also, just on your table is some information from NOBAS, from careers on migrants. So if you've got any issues, please have a talk to NOBAS there. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Mark.
Thanks, Michael. My name is Mark Champion. I'm GM of the advocacy area in the EMA. And I just want to take this opportunity to talk about 2 or 3 of the campaigns that we're doing, fairly broad, wide-ranging campaigns on 2 or 3 particular issues. The first one is the electricity transmission pricing. It sounds rather eye-watering, but essentially what the Electricity Authority is trying to do is to put costs where costs lie with respect to the price of transmission. As we know, transmission is mostly out of the South Island, and the big losers in any reallocation of costs around this area will be those furthest away from generation, which is the Auckland region, which is the EMA region. We're just drawing your attention to this campaign that we're running. It's fairly deep into opposition and government and media, and a decision is expected fairly soon from the Electricity Authority. And we've been mounting quite a vigorous campaign to oppose that, because the cost for our region, we anticipate around 140 million to our members, or in the membership area, and about 80 million to Auckland. So this is something very dear to our members' hearts. There's going to be some big losers in this debate, 7-figure losers in terms of per annum electricity costs increases. The second is been a while in gestation, but finally we're about to launch our work on the Resource Management Act. We've been calling for a very close look at the way in which the Resource Management Act has been functioning. We know that it's not working for business because you tell us that. What we've also now understood through a piece of research from the Environmental Defence Society is that it's not working for the environment either. So we've got a very strong story to talk to stakeholders, particularly government, around the need for a bottom-up review of just how appropriate the Resource Management Act is now for, particularly for businesses, for growth. And you know, we've got the housing crisis, we've got a lot of workarounds and infrastructure, and we think it's time for a bottom-up review. The third thing, and I'll just point out Paul Jarvie across in the corner here from our area. He's been doing some really great work on ageing workforce, and the statistics are eye-watering around the number of, I mean, this is something dear to our heart, of course, but the numbers around the number of folk in the workforce over the age of 65 and 20 years is something that we're all going to have to get our heads around, particularly around skills and training and the flexibility that will be required for older workers to be able to do that. So keep an eye on Paul's work, and we'll push out as much as we can about that to get everyone thinking about what the kind of solutions are. Our thoughts are that that our interest is to develop a toolbox for employers to sort of roll out within their businesses that, as they see appropriate, to enable them to tackle the issue more appropriately and in the best interests of their workforce. So thank you, everyone, and we'll get on with today's program.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Mark. There's a lot of work going on, as you can tell. For those new latecomers arriving, welcome. Just get you to flick your phones to silence. That would be kind of you. And let's now introduce our first speaker, Professor Paul Spooner. Paul is a real academic. The notes I got here say you joined Massey University in 1979, which shows a lifetime of study and hard work at Massey University. So we're very grateful to have you here. Appreciate that you have given a lot of work through various research programs, and note here the Ministry of Science and Innovation's $3.2 million project integration of immigrants, which seems entirely appropriate. So Professor Spooner, welcome. Thank you for coming.
Hi, everybody, and thanks for the introduction. Let me get underway. I'm part of a program called Cadence. So to update you, last year we got $5.5 million, and the $5.5 million is to track what's happening in New Zealand through to 2036.
Part of that is around a new demography that's emerging. So we're hearing about the ageing workforce, and I'll have a few comments about that. But we're also looking at some of the economic changes. So I want to start with that first, and then come on to some of the more demographic material. In a few weeks in Chicago, The Economist is running a conference called Future Works. And as you can see, they've pitched it as the fourth industrial revolution. Our own work suggests that demand in some sectors is going to flatten and possibly drop significantly. And I'll show you some of the figures that have come out in the last year or so in a moment. And that intersects with the demography that's beginning to emerge. And it's this decade, 2010, 2020, when a lot of this begins to happen. So by the 2020s, we should expect a quite different labour market and a quite different demography for New Zealand. And it's those two things that I just want to elaborate on today. By the way, I'm quite happy for this PowerPoint to be made available, Mike, so whatever. You might be aware, and you might know, that in 2012, a couple from Oxford University called Frey and Osborne looked at 750 occupations in the US and looked at the way in which digital developments were going to disrupt jobs. And they came up with a figure of 46% of the jobs that existed would not exist in a decade's time. And we had some interesting reports in the last year, and I'm not sure whether the EMA have seen these, but the most impressive one is called the Committee for the Economic Development of Australia, called Future Australia. They came up with a very similar figure, so around 46, 47% of jobs in 2015 would not exist in 2025 in Australia. And the argument is that a lot of jobs that can be reduced to a logarithm and to computers will replace people. And those tend to be the mid-level income and mid-level skilled jobs that are beginning to be impacted by that, but also some low-level. So the assumption is that you won't be talking to a person when you check out of a supermarket in 10 years' time. It'll all be done by machines. Very much in the same way, I've just arrived back from Beijing, very much in the same way that we arrive and we put our machine-readable passport in and we get a photograph taken. We don't talk to a human being. And you might be aware that NZIER and the Chartered Accountants did a similar report which looked specifically at New Zealand, and they suggested that chartered accountancy jobs would be significantly impacted by new technology. And we can see the impact, those mid-level jobs, but we can see it going down and up. And it's not to say that they won't be replaced, but they're going to be quite significant shifts. And our argument, I should say, is that we're really seeing the end of careers. So thanks for mentioning 1979, but I'm a standard worker, and my career for an institution which is ongoing, salary, has been for a long time, is actually now already a minority type of work engagement. So the idea that you would work in one occupation over a lifetime will end. And we use the American statistics, which show that people will work 5 to 8 jobs over a working life, and that's not working for a different employer, that's doing a different job. So when we talk to our students, we say in 10 years, we don't know what job you're going to be doing. What we need to do is give you soft and transferable skills so you can navigate the labour market yourselves. So less certainty and certainly less lifetime employment. And so that's the 5 to 8 different jobs. We think the American material applies here. And that's a mixture of globalization and technology. So just to stick with that for a moment, it's the offshoring of jobs. So between 500 and 600,000 jobs a year go out of the American economy to other economies. Mexico, Caribbean, I don't know whether you're aware, but many doctors in the US dictate their patient notes and they get typed up in the Caribbean overnight and come back as a text file next day. So it's that offshoring of jobs. And in our part of the world, it's going to be the fact that by the end of next year, Ford, Toyota and Holden won't exist in Australia. And that's 70,000 jobs that will go and another 200,000 jobs that will be impacted as we sort of deindustrialise. And then, of course, there's technology. But there's a really interesting paradox here, and that is because the OECD, by the way, in terms of what Paul is looking at, which is ageing workforces, we're at the back of the queue. So, you know, look at Japan, look at Germany. And we had a briefing last year. I'm part of an international network that met last year in Mexico City, and we were briefed by the German federal minister. And she talked about why Germany was accepting 1 million Syrian refugees from Angela Merkel, who would not normally be inclined to do that. But it's about factory workers. It's not about I'm sorry, I'm being unfair. It is about humanitarian reasons, but it's primarily about the fact that Germany needs workers. And 1 million Syrian refugees gives them workers. And so it's an immediate injection into the labour market. All of us are going to face a decline in labour supply. That's the demography, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But alongside that is the ability to upskill the workforce, either the existing workforce, and for those of us in the education and training sector, including the EMA, we're going to have to work quite hard to anticipate where the changes are coming and to prepare people for it. So one of the difficulties we have in the university sector is that employers tell us we're not producing the graduates, the skilled graduates that they need. But our turnaround, I mean, if you take a typical degree of 3 years, we're talking 3 to 5 years to provide a gap in the workforce. And many of our employers don't actually work on that sort of timeline. So we're going to have to be a lot smarter around that. So one of the inevitable things is that we're going to recruit from a global talent pool. And we're doing that, and we're doing it in a way that few other countries are. And I'll talk a little bit about that. So this is Paul's area, but the structural ageing of the population and workforce between the 2013 census and 10 years on, we will double the people over the age of 65. And one of the things that I'll show you in a moment is that we'll have more over 65 people than we have 0 to 15 in the age group in New Zealand. So that's already, this year, that will kick in Taranaki. There'll be more over 65s than 0 to 15s. So it's a whole shift in the structure. We get a rather indelicate here. In 1979, we would have talked about a pyramid shape to our demography, with about 10 to 12% of the people aged over 65. So it would be a pyramid shape. We now talk about a shape. So it bulges up here and then goes in. But the interesting thing is, well, there's a couple of things, but let me come back to that. We go sub-replacement soon. So we're still at replacement level, which is 2.1. Australia, as you can see there, oh no, I haven't put it up, but Australia's down at 1.7 births per woman. So that's below replacement level fertility. And that's why we're getting this shift. Not only is it that the baby boomers are getting older, but we're having fewer kids. And we're having them later. So the average age of first birth now for women in New Zealand is in their early 30s. So there's that delay. And that's the delayed births that are happening there. And as you can see, as you look around, I've just picked out at random, as you can see that the total fertility rates are really low now. But what the interesting thing is, I've just come back from China. I was in China on Monday, and we were talking about this with a Chinese expert. The Chinese are really concerned. Their total fertility rate is actually much lower than ours in New Zealand. So China as a whole, the fertility rate is down at around 1.2. So the issues that we're going to face, and I'll come back to this at the end, the issues we're going to face, they are going to face as well. China's going to be the first country that ages before it gets rich. Think about that. So a new New Zealand that begins to emerge. Firstly, already, the Asian community here in Auckland outnumbers the combined Māori and Pacific communities in size. Within the next decade, Asian communities, plural, will outnumber the Māori community nationally. So both of those communities will be around 800,000 people. The second thing that's going to happen is that what's happening in Taranaki is going to spread around New Zealand so that we get smaller cohorts in the younger age groups and we've got a lot more in the older age groups. So what Paul's doing for the EMA about an ageing workforce is actually going to be one of the significant challenges in the next 10 years. In terms of Auckland, already we are now dependent on immigration for our skill supply and our population. If you look at the last year, Auckland is growing really fast. New Zealand is growing really fast. New Zealand had a population growth rate last year of 2.1%. For the OECD, that is very high, and Auckland is the major beneficiary of that. But 2/3 of Auckland's growth now comes from immigration. It doesn't come from fertility. And as we go over the next few years, the reliance on immigration will grow and the reliance on fertility will decline. Now, unless somebody in this room has a very smart idea about increasing fertility, this is not going to be reversed. So all the countries in the OECD are facing this, and of the countries in the OECD, New Zealand is still at replacement fertility level. That's not true of practically any other country in the OECD. They are all sub-replacement. So whatever we're going to experience, they are already beginning to experience that. The other thing is that the growth, New Zealand growth, is going to be located in the city. So over the next 2 decades, 60% of New Zealand's population growth will be in Auckland. And that has some significant implications. And the population of Auckland that will be a member of one of the Asian communities will grow from the quarter of the population that it is now to about 1/3. So this will be a city which will be very significantly, in a demographic sense, Asian. Now, just to reinforce this a little bit, we talk about things like dependency ratios and exit-entry ratios. So an entry-exit ratio is the number of people in the labour market in the 15 to 24 age group compared to the 55 to 64 age group. And as you can see there, the ratio begins to reach parity. Now that means that increasingly your age group is in what we call the exit age group. In fact, it's not going to be the exit age group. New Zealand in the OECD is already the highest country in terms of people over the age of 65 in the paid workforce. So that will grow, and we're going to probably have to rethink what we call entry and exit ratios, because they just no longer work. But you can see there between 1996 and 2031 things change. And just to go to the dependency ratio for a minute, when Mike and I were growing up, the dependency ratio was 4:1. So 4 people in paid work to 1 dependent. Over this period, certainly by the 2030s, it's probably going to be 1:1. So already we're heading towards 2:1, 2 people in paid work for 1 person who is a dependent. And typically they are a superannuitant. So think about that and think about how we pay for it, because that's going to be a major challenge. And already you're beginning to see in parts of the workforce, Paul, I'm happy to crunch these figures. And by the way, because we get paid by the government to do this, this is available to you guys. This is a sort of public good. So I'm happy to cut and dice as you see fit. But the high average age is, to go back to the previous slide, is the entry-exit ratio. And as you can see, in terms of hospitals and nursing homes, 10 are 55 plus age group compared to 4 who are, I've forgotten what the other one is, 15 to 24. So you can see what's beginning to happen. The second one is the ratio of women to men, so 22 women to 10 men. Building and construction, it's less of a disparity, but you can see again there that there's a significant reliance on an older workforce that we would have typically in the past called an exit workforce. The question is, of course, whether or not in building and construction there are going to be many over the age of 65, which is a question. So the outcome really is that we're going to see quite different economies and sort of demographic profiles in New Zealand. We anticipated that New Zealand would reach 5 million and Auckland would reach 2 million in the mid to late 2020s. But with the growth rates, it's going to be much earlier than that. I've said here we'll reach 5 million in the early 2020s. If we continue to grow as we've done in the last year, we'll actually reach 5 million in 2020. So we're going to have to bring all our projections back in terms of our growth. Just a plug, there was a, I've just written a book that came out on Friday called Rebooting the Regions. Already 1 out of every 5 regions is experiencing population decline or population stagnation, and over the next period, 2/3 of New Zealand will experience population stagnation or decline. Let me unpack that a bit for you. So I'm from the Bay, Hawke's Bay, and Hawke's Bay, Napier will grow a wee bit, Hastings won't. Wairoa, Waipukurau, Waipawa are already in population decline. And there are 2 things happening there. One is that they are losing population. They typically lose the kids in the late teens and 20s. They go elsewhere for jobs and education and don't come back. So there's a bite out of the apple. But the other thing is, of course, they are increasingly seeing older people dominate their population. So Thames is a classic case. Thames is already 30% over the age of 65. And think about that. Think about how you support an ageing population in a place like Thames, and think about things like dementia wards. I've already made the point that Auckland will be the place where future growth will occur. 60% of New Zealand's future growth will occur. And what's interesting is there's a golden triangle. And to those who are watching this in the Waikato, that golden triangle sees spillover into Hamilton and Tauranga. Tauranga is a destination for retired people, but it's also a spillover. So you're going to see a spillover. And what's interesting here is that Auckland, if you take something like the median wage between Auckland and Northland, there's a 60% difference between the two. So we have the richest part of New Zealand living alongside the poorest part of New Zealand. Northland won't get much growth, if any at all. So the growth will occur in Auckland, Hamilton, Tauranga, Christchurch because of the rebuild, Wellington a little bit, and Queenstown Lakes. So we're going to see quite different economies and quite different demographies beginning to emerge. Now let's come to immigration, which is what we should be talking about. The figures came out yesterday, and I haven't had the chance to update them, so these are the previous figures. In fact, what's interesting is that despite the bank economists, I'll just get my dig in about the bank economists, despite what the bank economists are saying, with 1 or 2 exceptions like Tony Alexander, and despite what Treasury is saying, there is no indication that immigration rates are going to drop off anytime soon. The government will certainly be a bit more selective, particularly around the skilled work visas, and you'll see pulling back of the numbers. But the numbers are incredibly high. 209,000 temporary work visas, this is 12 months up until, I better get this right with Carl sitting in the room here. 12 months up to the August date, isn't it? So the 12 months up to August is 209,000 temporary work visas, which is 30,000 more than the previous year. The resident visas, 52,000, is 20% higher. We have over 100,000 students visa holders in New Zealand at the moment, and 1 out of every 5 of those will transition into permanent residence and work here. So as you can see, the residence applications and the approvals are incredibly high, and the target that has been set, which I think will be reduced, by the way, is set at 90 to 100,000 for the next 2 years. Let me make some. Let me stick with that for a moment. That means that in terms of the OECD, the arrival of permanent, I haven't got, perhaps I've got it later, but the permanent arrivals is 125,000, by the way, and then we've got some departures. Of those arrivals, about a quarter of them are Australians and New Zealanders coming, but there's 39,000 work visas in that as well. So we've got a very high recruitment attraction rate at the moment, both in terms of permanent and temporary visas. Now, just if you want some comparisons, we're tracking through at about 1.6% of our population who are arriving as permanent arrivals each year. Our traditional target has been 1%, so about 47,000. In fact, the net gain at the moment is 69,000. So it's a lot higher than we would expect. And I do not understand why Treasury think we're going to drop off to a long-term average net gain, which is 12,000 from 69,000. Don't understand that, but that's what they are projecting. Australia and Canada have the same immigration selection and recruitment process as we do, but they are both struggling to get to 1%. So Australia won't get to 200,000, it'll be about 185,000 in the same 12 months, and Canada won't get to 300,000, it'll probably be about 260, 270,000 in that period. So of the three countries, and by the way, just to acknowledge Carl and his department, let's acknowledge Carl and give him the credit for this. But we, in terms of our recruitment system, have been an innovator recently. And so last year Australia adopted the New Zealand system, this year Canada will adopt the system. So whereas we tended to adopt their system, which was a pointer system, we're now the innovator in this space. But in terms of the OECD, if you translated the New Zealand arrivals into the Australian context, they wouldn't be getting 185,000, they would be getting 650,000 if you prorated it. So it's a very interesting period, and as we've come out of the GFC, we've had these very high numbers, and they are not tailing off very much at all. They're flattening out, but they're flattening out at a very high level. So I suspect the government will actually move to reduce the numbers, but be a bit more selective around where those approvals go. So we've got a pick and choose system. Australia, Canada and New Zealand are really the only ones in the OECD that do this. So about 60% of our approvals come through the skilled visa categories, and about 35% come through family reunification. In the USA this year, about 65% will come through family reunification. Very, very different system. Do not compare, please, the American and the New Zealand system. Just to give you some stats here, in terms of just getting to moderate economic growth, and 2.5% is okay. We need to grow our labour market by 1.5%. What I think you should be taking from what I've said already, that if we rely only on domestic supply, we're not going to even get close to that. So we need to get immigrants to both support our population, but also as a talent pool for our immigrants. I've been very annoyed by some of the political comments, so this is where I direct my comments to one or two politicians and one particular political party. What we're doing is, the researchers, what we're doing is looking at what the diversity dividend is. So our title is Kate is capturing the diversity dividend of Aotearoa New Zealand. And what you can see as we look around the world is that the economies that are doing well are those that are focused on innovation. And the question that I think we should ask and we need to answer is, does immigration yield economic benefits? And I think alongside that is we need to ask some questions around how good we are, not simply at recruiting people, but at settling them and at matching them with jobs. And I think this is where we need to do better. Firstly, it's very clear that many of the city economies around the world that are doing the best are also welcoming societies or cities or economies are welcoming to immigrants. So when we look at city performance, it's quite clear that immigration is related to innovation and return. In New Zealand, the difficulty is that going to grow in an economic sense. So go back to my example of Hawke's Bay. If you look at the between the censuses, 2006, 2013, they actually lost 1,300 immigrants in those two periods. So the regions, even if they attract immigrants, are not keeping immigrants. And it's partly because of the depth of the labour market, but it's also because those regions are not particularly welcoming and because there aren't other members of that ethnic group in those regions. It's the New Zealander in Earl's Court in London phenomenon. So when you go overseas, you need people to help guide you around the society that you live in. So your co-ethnics are the people that do that for you. If you are interested in this, go on to some of the community websites around Auckland and you can get anything from a co-ethnic. So if you're a South African or a Chinese, you can get your travel agent, your insurance, your banker, your employer, your dentist, your doctor on those websites, and they will speak the same language as you, Afrikaans or Mandarin, and they'll be somebody who knows what happens here, but is able to talk and interact with people who are members of that same community. So one of the things that we are looking at, and we're looking at organisations, but we're also looking at government departments and others, including MB, is how do we then bring in these innovative outsiders and how do we settle them in the communities and in the businesses that we operate. The other side of that is, of course, these immigrants are contributing significantly to the demand for goods and services. One of the peculiar things that's happened is that immigration from India and China has increased the imports from those countries, not necessarily increased the exports. We've got to get that right. We've got to get the flow going both ways. But what we are seeing is that there are very strong positive outcomes when we bring in those from outside the country, and it adds to our human and capital stock. Now, we're going to calculate all of this, but the Canadians have done it for us, and I think the stats will be probably be quite similar here. But it's going to be another year before we get the stats for New Zealand, and we've got a team of economists and econometricians working on this, and it's quite complicated, and there's some quite sophisticated modelling. So let me give you the Canadian stats, just to give you a taste, to go back to that question. Is there an economic benefit to us? Absolutely. New immigrants earn 62 cents for every dollar earned by Canadians. So there is a problem there. And that's true for New Zealand. It takes about 12 years for an immigrant who has come to New Zealand, who has the same, let's compare that person and myself. If we have the same qualifications, the same experience, it takes about 12 years for an immigrant to catch up with me. So we are losing quite a lot of income. Well, immigrants are losing quite a lot of income. We're also losing things like taxation and capability in that process. So the Canadians calculate that the loss to Canada, a much larger country than this, annually of around $20 billion because of that. Less pay, less tax, less spend. There's a very interesting report by Citizenship and Immigration Canada, says who drives taxing, which is the downshift post-arrival. They've got a saying, if an immigrant fails, Canada fails, and I think we should adopt that. So we've got to work a wee bit better at some of the challenges because our supply, our labour supply, our communities are increasingly going to be diverse. We cannot afford for immigrants to come in to experience significant loss of income or employment once they get here. And if you look around some immigrants are certainly not getting the jobs that they deserve. And probably we need to keep talking with employers. And one of the challenges are small and medium enterprises. So many of the corporates, I was a judge in the diversity awards this year, and we did site visits. I was really impressed with some of the practice that you see in organisations in Auckland. But quite often they are the bigger organisations who've got, you know, big HR teams who are able to consider some of these issues and for whom the bottom line is absolutely essential. And so we might pick, you know, various companies in Auckland and say, look, they're doing a good job. They're doing a good job in terms of recognising their diverse workforce. They've got good practice, and it has a good bottom line. The objective and perceived ethno-racial inequality is something we talk to immigrants about. So we talk to them about, do you think you've been treated fairly in the workplace? The good news is that New Zealand rates of positive answers are much higher than they are in practically any other part of the OECD, including Australia. So immigrants are more likely to say in New Zealand that they are being treated well, let's say by employers. However, there's another group who feel very disenchanted by the way in which employers treat them. And we typically get stories about surname or accent discrimination in New Zealand. We do need to focus on immigrant settlement outcomes. One of the things, we've got these very high rates, but one of the things that we need to focus on is, and I'm not talking about you as individuals, I'm talking more generally here, is that we've got to achieve positive outcomes because people will stay here. The same political party that I'm directing some of this at has challenged me in terms of my support for family reunification. Look, a family unit is a unit which might well include grandparents because they are child carers and they release two people to work in the workforce. If you want to keep people in New Zealand, then absolutely you have parents. You provide them with the opportunity to bring parents here because that helps them be economically active. I have no problem whatsoever in some of the scare stories about elderly Chinese coming here. Yes, there are challenges. Yes, we don't want them isolated, but they are actually part of our economic viability, both generally, but particularly in terms of family units. There are questions. Do immigrants displace local job seekers? I've mentioned before, and I'll mention again, I'm an orchard owner in Hawke's Bay, and the RSE scheme is something that we've embraced big time. But we're getting some opposition locally from people who say, well, you're taking away a job from a local person. We need to get that right, and we need to make sure that we're absorbing these very high immigrant flows into New Zealand. Can I just finish up and let's have a bit of a debate around some of this. At the moment, our three big rival groups are from China and India. Both of them provide about 16 to 17% of our skilled work visa arrivals. And then the one that's rapidly coming through the ranks are the Filipinos. 3/4 of the Indian and Chinese come to Auckland. They don't go to other parts of New Zealand. The Filipinos do. The Brits are dropping back, but the Brits are dropping back because the numbers are so high. So the number of Brits arriving is just about the same, but of course 125,000 arrivals, the number of Brits stays the same, the proportion declines. So the Brits are down at around 12% in terms of arrivals. So between the Indians, Chinese and the Filipinos, you have almost half of the immigrants arriving in New Zealand at the moment. Will it stay the same? No, it won't for two reasons. Firstly, we've done a very good job at recruiting skilled middle-class immigrants out of Shanghai and Mumbai. Other countries will follow us, and already other countries are beginning to experiment with our point system. So we've had, Australia, Canada, New Zealand have had the field pretty much to ourselves, but it's not going to stay that way because of ageing societies elsewhere in the OECD. They're going to have to get their workers. At the moment, the European Union has pulled those workers in from Eastern Europe. So it's the Poles arriving in London to do whatever, be plumbers or whatever. So they haven't looked internationally because they've had those 600,000 Poles come in to work in the UK. But in the future they are, and they're going to look, as we have done, at places where there are surplus, at the moment, surplus skilled immigrants who are prepared to shift. So, you know, on Monday, the Vice-Chancellor Steve Mahari and I were in Beijing, and it's really interesting to see the positive view that the Chinese hold around New Zealand. We were talking about students and staff, but you know, you get a sense that New Zealand is very highly favoured. By the way, the major reason by far for immigrants to come to Auckland is the quality of the lifestyle. The second reason is a good public education in English, and the third is public safety. Economic factors come quite a way down, but they are all very committed to their children doing well. I wouldn't mind talking a little bit about that. So other countries are going to recruit from the same pools that we've recruited. China and India at the moment have excess talent, and we recruited from that excess talent certainly since 2000, and particularly since the end of the GFC in 2012. It won't stay that way. The second thing, to go back to something I mentioned very early on, I don't think China's going to allow skilled migrants to leave. Sorry, repeat that. It's not going to allow skilled labour to leave, because within the next 10 years, China will have a skilled shortage problem as well. So if you look at that, ultra-low fertility down at 1.5, one-child policies, it's taken about 80 to 100 million out of the population, and they're growing median age, which is interesting. I've put there, for China it's 34.5 compared with the USA at 37. China's beginning to look like the rest of us. And so why would they allow people to leave when they are having skilled immigration shortages? So if you want to look at what they do, what they've done in the last 2 years is they've actually reduced significantly the outbound tourism. Now you wouldn't know that from the stats yesterday because we had 3.5 million tourists arrive in New Zealand in the last year, and the fastest growing group is the Chinese. But overall, the Chinese have put major incentives and disincentives in place to try and keep tourists in country and not allow them to go elsewhere. And I think over the next wee while, China, I'm not so sure about India, but China will not allow us to recruit its best and brightest in the future. So we've got to anticipate that, and the question for all of us is, where are we going to get our skilled labour from? So just to wrap up really, I'm quite clear. I think immigration provides us with very clear returns. It increases the skill talent pool that we have. I think one of the things that we need to keep emphasising is the returns that we get. So international students, 100,000 of them earns us a lot of bucks in each year. And it's got a multiplier effect that we only are beginning to understand. So it's not simply student fees and their direct costs. It's a lot of indirect income. It's a lot of benefits to all of us. I was going to say something about that. 3/4 of the Asian community in Auckland are immigrants. Only 1/4 are locally born. We're just beginning to see the first waves of the New Zealand-born coming through into the university system. They're the best students I've ever seen. They are stunning. They are really, really good. They have a work ethic and an approach to education which is very, very different to the New Zealand that I know, and they are going to transform it. And as they get through and get into the workforce, they're going to transform the workforce as well. I've had a bit to do with Dragons, which is a local activist, Chinese activist group. So Dragons is a Z on the end, and they are very concerned about what they call the bamboo ceiling. So you heard of the glass ceiling, they're concerned at the bamboo ceiling. They're concerned about the way in which employers are not seeing the ability of these Asian communities as employees, as managers, and as customers. And so they're running a bit of a campaign. It's a very interesting one. I want to social cohesion. I'll come to sport under national identity, because Mike and I were having a bit of a discussion about this. We do need to work at social cohesion. Last year we had a meeting of 18 OECD countries in Berlin. New Zealand is an outlier. You know, they say, well, where's your anti-immigration politics? Well, we've got some, but it's sort of anti-immigrant light. You know, it's not like the German neo-Nazis. It's nothing like that. So we are reasonably relaxed about immigration, but we do need to think about social cohesion. So yes, there is an economic return, but let's not forget the community benefits, the community dynamics and the community issues. We need to focus on absorption, which is how immigrants are absorbed into our community or into our workplaces. It has some significant impacts on our national identity. Let me use the example. I got into trouble last week on Catherine Ryan on Radio New Zealand because she wanted to talk about sports. And I said, well, rugby. Let's talk about rugby. Oh, okay. Doing very well at a national level. All Blacks, you know, golden era of All Blacks. We thought with Richie and Dan going, All Blacks might not be so good. Well, that was wrong. Steve Hansen, probably the best coach that I've ever seen. Steve Tew runs a very professional organisation. 150,000 people play rugby in New Zealand, but in Auckland, rugby is declining significantly because of the immigrant factor. So in the last 2 years, there's been a drop-off in the secondary school population playing rugby of 29%. There's been an increase in the football population, the soccer population, 22%. Badminton, table tennis are booming. If you look at table tennis in Auckland, 80% of those playing are Asian, mostly Chinese. That's true for the administrators, it's true for the coaches. Golf, basketball, booming. Rugby league, no. Very different story. And if you look at the top 20 leisure activities and sports in Auckland, rugby comes number 20. And that's the immigration effect. And so there's a very different story. Steve knows this, and Simon Devoy has been appointed to talk about it, and they look at it, and the rugby union, the ARU, put in $300,000 to try and address it. But we've talked to the immigrants. We were asked to research immigrant participation in sports, and it's too rough. We're not playing it. We don't have a history of understanding or playing it. And by the way, we don't want our kids going to a rugby practice or playing on a Saturday. Education's more important. So Mike and I were talking about that, but if you go to the badminton hall here over in Gillies Ave, they got onto it very quickly. Card swipe, online booking, 2 o'clock in the morning, go and see the number of Asians playing badminton in the hall. So there's some really interesting dynamics for that. That's a bit of an aside. And I do get very concerned that we give voice to anti-immigrant politics. There's one thing that will very quickly turn off immigrants, and that is if they don't feel welcome. If you go back a couple of years, in Australia, they had 3 Indian international student deaths. That cut the international Indian students in Australia by half, and that was in spite of the Australian government offering to pay their fees and offering them subsidies to stay in Australia. They didn't. So your reputation is absolutely essential. We've got a good reputation. It wouldn't take much to undermine that reputation. So it's a really interesting dynamic, and I think we need to pay attention to it. Oh, that's you, Carl. That's me. I think it's an interesting story. It's a very positive story, but we do need to keep working at it. And I think we do need to keep paying attention to what's actually happening out there. Thank you very much.
What we'll do questions afterwards. Okay, because I'm conscious that we are should be finished at 4:30, and it's 4:30, so it's a bit of a pressure effect. I'm going to have to disappear myself to another engagement. But what a fascinating presentation! That was just incredible. I'm just curious to know, folk in the room, the ageing of people over 65 in the workplace. How many of you are seeing an increase of that in your workplace? Is there much of that? Okay, so there's a few, maybe half the room. And that stat there of people changing jobs 5 to 8 times, that's not employers, that's jobs, doing a fundamentally different job. I guess that means changing every 6 to 8 years, fundamentally what you do. Are there people here who changed their job in the last 6 to 8 years? Is that a common experience? Yeah, there's a few of those as well. So there you go. I have to say, as an IT firm in mind, if we couldn't find immigrants to work for us, we would be in deep trouble. Fortunately, we attract a lot of South Africans, and after a rugby weekend like last weekend, that's a great deal of fun. I'd now like to welcome Carl Andrews from Immigration New Zealand. Carl, you're at the nitty-gritty of actually helping us find immigrants, and thank you very much for coming in to see us.
Thanks. Yeah, it was a exceptionally interesting presentation that you did there, and I'm sure we've all learned a lot from it. Especially as we look towards going the next 10, 15 years and the impacts of all the baby boomers like myself potentially moving into retirement. So there are significant impacts. My presentation is really going to be fairly broad, and I'm going to just talk about the existing options that might have an impact on you as a business and how you can think about bringing in migrants from offshore. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the skilled migrant category, but very broadly. I'm not going to go into detail in terms of the points. It's just to give you an overview. We'll then talk about the work to residence options, and they are exactly that. It's work first, leading to residence, and the different policies that apply under that, so that if you're looking to recruit from offshore, you've got an understanding of what might be the best policy option for you. And then we'll talk about essential skills work visas, which is broadly everybody else that doesn't fit into one of those other categories. Incorporates the long-term skill shortage list, an immediate skill shortage list, and I'll explain what those are. And then moving on to what we call the labour market test. And then, of course, there are other work visa options as well. There's specific purpose work visas, and of course, working holiday makers. And we do have the international students that are here as well that can work. So skilled migrant category is a points-based system. At the moment, as it stands, you need 100 points to be able to submit an expression of interest. And an expression of interest is basically saying, I have an interest in living and working in New Zealand. So long as you've got a minimum of 100 points, you can submit an expression of interest. As it stands at the moment, with 140 points and above, you're automatically invited to apply for residence. Between 100 and 135 with a job offer, you're also selected from what we call a pool of migrants that are applying from around the world and invited to apply as well, assuming that the job is skilled. This policy is currently under review, so there are likely to be some changes to the skilled migrant category. And as Professor Spoonley said, we've got high numbers of people coming to New Zealand currently, and so the skilled migrant category is up for review to consider more along the way of how we might be able to tailor it to attract more skilled, highly skilled workers, and perhaps not quite so many at the lower level. Points are awarded for an offer of skilled employment. As it stands at the moment, it's 50 points for an offer of skilled employment. You get points for your work experience, you get points for your qualifications, and you get points for your age. And so basically, if you can meet the criteria of 100 points, and if you think about 50 points for qualification, 50 points for work experience, 30 points as a general rule for the younger people within the age group, you're already there so long as you've got a job offer. So it's a relatively simple system. We're hoping that we can keep it simple, because the whole idea is that we do want to attract those migrants that have got the skills that New Zealand needs. So that's a residence option. So that's for people coming here to live. It's not to say they can't come and work here first. And the fact that there's significant numbers of people do arrive in New Zealand, start off on a work visa, and then apply for residence while they're here. Of course, if you've got a job offer available for them and they are overseas, there's nothing to stop them applying for residence prior to them coming to New Zealand. So then we've got work to residence. And these policies kind of stand alone, and you quite often find that people get a bit of one mixed up with another one, and they assume that a salary level is applicable to the skilled migrant category, and it applies to other work visa policies. But basically, it's about an employer. What we do is basically say to an employer, well, you can become an accredited employer with immigration. And as an accredited employer, we will enable you to bring in the skilled migrants that you need, so long as they meet the specific criteria. They've got to be aged under 55, and they've got to be paid a salary, base salary of $55,000 or more. So to become an accredited employer, we're obviously looking at the sustainability of the company. How long has the company been in business? Because if we're going to bring people out from overseas to work for that company, we want to be sure that 6 months later it's not going to go into receivership or no longer be in existence. So the kind of things we're looking at is, are they in a sound financial position? Are they committed to training New Zealand permanent residents or citizens? Because clearly that's an important aspect of, it's New Zealand permanent residents or citizens first. And if we can't fill the skill gaps with those people, then of course we look to bring people in from overseas. So does the company have good HR policies and processes? We need to know that if migrants come in to work for you, that we can be reasonably confident that you know who they are, when their visas are expiring so that they're not ending up working here lawfully, and that they're not going to be exploited because you've got good HR policies and processes in place, as well as systems for training. So it's a good option. A lot of people use it, particularly in the IT field, because quite often people in IT are not necessarily relatively well qualified. Lots of them are, but there are the young people like a 17-year-old that hacked into the Pentagon. He's got a lot of skills that perhaps IT people would like, but he's not going to have the qualification necessary that's going to enable him to get the points under the skilled migrant category. So as an accredited employer, even though he might be 17 or 18, you might be paying him $100,000 a year. He won't get through skilled migrant category, but he will if you're an accredited employer. So it's a good option where skilled migrant category may or may not work for the migrants. So that's a work to residence. So basically what happens is the person gets a 30-month work visa, and at the end of 24 months they can apply for residence based solely on the fact that they are working for an accredited employer. So you can see it's quite a good marketing tool as well. Because if you're competing offshore and you're an accredited employer, then there's obviously an advantage if you're offering a qualification to a person, a job offer to a person, and you're an accredited employer. So it's a big plus in terms of the marketing aspect. And they don't have to do anything else. They don't have to meet the point system under skilled migrant category. At the end of 24 months, they can apply for residence. They've just got to prove to us that they've been earning the base salary that was agreed to right at the very beginning. And so long as they can demonstrate that, they've got good health and character, they're granted residence. Now, a lot of the people that do come out under the work to residence option might choose to apply under skilled migrant category anyway, because it's a little bit quicker, and that's their choice. So if they decided that they're here working for an accredited employer, but I don't want to wait for 2 years in order to apply for residence, they can still apply under the skilled migrant category. So that's one of the work to residence options. And the second one is what we call the long-term skill shortage list. So it's a list of occupations that's put together that identifies those occupations that are in short supply in New Zealand. And you'll usually find that those occupations that are on that list are probably global to a large extent. There's engineers, there's IT people, health professionals, and generally most of the OECD countries are all competing for the same kind of skills. So they've probably got similar lists. Whether they have a long-term skill shortage list or not, I don't know. So it works basically the same as the accredited employer option, but it's actually about the individual. So rather than having to work for an accredited employer, if I'm an engineer and I've got a qualification that meets the criteria of the long-term skill shortage list, I can apply for a work visa under the long-term skill shortage list. Same kind of deal, at the end of 24 months I can apply for residence based on the fact that I have a qualification and a skill that's on the long-term skill shortage list. And I've only got to meet a salary at that point of $45,000 when I apply for residence, and I can be granted residence based on the fact that I have an occupation on that long-term skill shortage list. And the beauty of the work to residence options for employers is that basically there's no necessity to have to advertise the position, because clearly if it's on the skill shortage list, we've already determined that there's a skill shortage and we can't find those people in New Zealand. So you don't have to provide evidence of advertising that role in order to be able to offer the person a job to work for you under the long-term skill shortage list or under your work to residence option. And we like lists, so we also have an immediate skill shortage list. This is not a work to residence option, so it's got no association with becoming a permanent resident of New Zealand or resident of New Zealand. This is basically saying that in some regions there will be occupations that are in short supply. So for example, I might be a boat builder or I might be a boat building company in Northland and I have a shortage of boat builders. But in Dunedin, there might not be a need for boat builders in Dunedin. So this list is put together based on submissions from industry to say we have a particular skill shortage within our region. Can you please put it on the immediate skill shortage list? That way we don't have to advertise every time we want to recruit somebody for a position within our region so long as it's on that list. So no residence at the end of it. It's just you don't have to necessarily advertise the position given that we've already acknowledged that there's this particular skill shortage in that region. So it just enables the work visa process a lot quicker than it would do normally. So those are the kind of options where advertising is not necessarily required by you in order to bring in people from overseas to fill skill gaps within your business. If they don't meet those criteria on any one of those particular options, then you're obliged to do a labour market test. So the labour market test is about saying, well, okay, this particular position is, we're not an accredited employer, it's not on the long-term skill shortage list, it's not on the immediate skill shortage list. Immigration wants to be satisfied that you're doing what you can to make sure that there are no New Zealand permanent residents or citizens available to fill that role. And that's how the process works. So I can't see that from then, so I need to turn around and have a look at it. So basically you identify the vacancy. If it's a skill level 1 to 3, a skill level 1 to 3 is just to explain on ANSCO, there's a website, Australia and New Zealand standard classification of occupations put together by the Statistics Departments of Australia and New Zealand, and identifies occupations and gives them a skill level, 1 to 5. 1 to 3 being what we call skilled, 4 to 5 being semi-skilled or low skilled. So, and as a broad brush, you could kind of say that the jobs that would be in skill level 4 to 5 are kind of the jobs that you really don't necessarily need a qualification or a trade to be able to do. So it might be retail shop assistant or a cleaner, where basically any of us here with a couple of weeks or a few days training could probably do that job. They normally fit into skill level 4 or 5. 1 to 3 tend to be the more the occupations that would require some kind of qualification or trade. Now, so skill levels 4 to 5 require you to advertise a vacancy with work and income. So you have to advertise for all of them and demonstrate to immigration that you can't find a New Zealand permanent resident or citizen to do the job. But if it's a skill level 4 or 5 occupation, it's also mandatory for you to notify work and income that you have a vacancy and what that vacancy is. At that point, work and income will send you people that they believe that could do that particular job. You'll interview those people, determine whether or not they are suitable for the job or available to do the work. And so long as you can satisfy us that you've done that and you've provided evidence that you can't find anybody to fill that particular role, then we can consider a work visa application. And the work and income will give you what we call a skills match report. So they basically will have a look at it, they'll determine whether or not they've got people, they'll tell us whether or not you've interviewed those people for that particular role and how many you interviewed. And then if they're happy, they'll give you the skills match report that you can then submit with your application for a work visa for the person that you want to bring in from overseas. We then look at that and say, well, okay, we're satisfied that you've taken all steps to try and find a New Zealand permanent resident or citizen. You've been to work and income, you've advertised the vacancy, they've said, no, we don't have people available, we can then look to approve the work visa application. In skill levels, the next one. Skill levels 4 or 5 only get a 1-year work visa. And the reason for that is things can change in that market very quickly over a 12-month period because they are semi-skilled or low-skilled roles. So any visa that is a skill level 4 or 5 role will only get a 12-month work visa. If it's skilled, it's 3 years as a general rule, or 5 years if the salary is above 55 as a one-off. But skill levels 1 to 3, normally it's going to be a 3-year work visa. So it gives you plenty of opportunity and it gives the applicant plenty of opportunity to consider what other options they might like to explore in terms of living here permanently. Skipping back to the approval in principle, that's very much the same as a work visa for one individual, but it's for a company where they might say, well, look, we really need 10 or 15 of these people. We will make a case to immigration for approval in principle. You do exactly the same thing as you would do for one person. You show us that you've advertised, what the result of that advertising, why there were no New Zealand permanent residents or citizens available who can fill that role. And if you can make a strong case to us, we then go to the unions, we go to the labour inspectors, we go to excellent compensation, we talk to health and safety people about your particular company. What kind of track record do you have? Now, we take their comments into consideration, and if there's significant comments, we'll put it back to you for response. We gather all that information, and the case officer will make a decision what to approve or not approve you for an approval in principle. And what that means is that basically you can go offshore and recruit anywhere you like, so long as those people meet the criteria that's been agreed in that approval of principle. So if it was, must have 5 years work experience working in a large institution dealing with engineering project work, or whatever the case may be, that's what we would have as part of that approval of principle. So that when you went to select somebody from offshore, we then are able to check, do they meet the criteria that you had determined you needed in order to fill that position. And if they meet the criteria, we'll approve the work visa. So it just saves you having to do it one after the other each time you do it. And normally it's over a 12-month period, so we'll give you an approval in principle for 12 months to recruit 10 people in whatever the sector is. So that's kind of very broadly the options that are available from a work-wise point of view for you as employers looking to bring in people from overseas. Working holiday schemes are another good source of taking on people who might be here for holiday purposes. They get an open work visa, and usually they're for 12 months. There are some countries where you may not be able to employ them for more than 3 months at a time. They're very few. Most of them are 12 months. The UK working holiday scheme's 2 years, and Canada's 2 years, but they can only work for 12 months across that time frame. So a lot of employers will take people on a working holiday scheme, especially in the semi-skilled, lower skilled roles. If you do take them on under a working holiday scheme, it's a fixed term contract because a working holiday scheme is not renewable, so the policy stands on its own. So you would offer them a fixed term contract in line with their working holiday visa. If you decide you like the person and they've got some skills you want, there's nothing to stop them applying under one of those other categories or policy options that I've just previously described. So if you said, we really want to keep this person, they've got skills that we need, there's nothing to stop them, if you're an accredited employer, applying under your work to residence talent visa accredited employer option, and they'll be granted a work visa in line with that particular policy. So you can do the two hand in hand. One is a working holiday fixed term contract. The second one, you say, okay, we want to keep you, here's a new contract which will support an application for one of the other options. So that's really it in a nutshell. One more specific purpose work visa. Specific purpose work visa is really kind of project related. For example, you buy a new machine from Germany, nobody knows how to use it. You need to bring in some people for a particular project, and that project is to perhaps install the machine and train your workers in how to operate it. So those types of applications are based on a case made by you as an employer. You don't have to provide evidence of advertising. You've just got to be able to make a case to say why you need to bring these people in for a particular project. IT use them as well. They'll come in, there might be a particular IT system that they're installing in a company. They need some expertise from overseas. That person's only going to be here for 3-4 months. So you can make a case for a specific purpose work visa to bring that person in for that particular project. So it's usually going to have a start date and an end date, and a set of skills that are required that you need in order to do that. So that's kind of me, really. Oh, sorry, no, it's not. But wait, there's more. Now, just a little bit about immigration online, e-visas now. So our online system's been going for several months now and growing all the time. So individuals now can apply online for their visas. And as from the 21st of November, I think it says there, pretty much everybody will be able to apply for their visa online, whether they be onshore or offshore. In some countries, there will still be a requirement for passports to be sent, but for the majority, it will be an electronic visa. And less will you see a visa label in a passport, because you'll be seeing more and more electronic visas. Now, the electronic visa is a piece of paper, and will have the visa on it. The applicant's told to bring that piece of paper with them, with their passport, when they come into New Zealand. So our system will know that the electronic visa has been issued. When they arrive at customs, they present that electronic visa, and they can come through. So it's making it a whole lot easier for individuals to apply, rather than having to go through a paper system. At the moment, we can't do it for families, so if a family is applying together, and the reason being that they tend to get split up, because with an online application, the beauty of it is we can process it anywhere around the world. So the person might submit an application in London, but could end up being processed in Fiji because it's electronic, it's online. So it's a big advantage in terms of managing workloads, but it's also much better for the individual because it's all done online. So they don't necessarily have to do much at all. Only a few countries would require passports to be sent, otherwise they'll all be issued electronic visas. Medicals, just a little bit of advice on that, because we've gone electronic on medicals as well. So if you have an individual applicant who's gone to see a panel physician, and there's a list of panel doctors that they must go to see, so you can't just go to your doctor down the road, you've got to go to one of the panel physicians. They have an electronic system as well. So they'll go through the medical with you and the chest x-ray, and that information will transfer through to our assessment team, and the applicant won't have a copy of the medicals as a hard copy. It's electronically sent to health assessment team. From there, if the medicals are clear, the work visa will be issued. If there's something wrong with the medical, it will be referred to a medical assessor, and the medical assessor will determine what needs to be done. Is the person likely to be a burden on the taxpayer-funded healthcare system? Make a decision, send that back electronically, and the application will continue to proceed. Now we're finished.